Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Hudson. I'm the acting curator of public programs at the Fowler Museum of UCLA, and it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual studio visit with Leah Mata Fragua. Leah is an artist, educator, and member of the Tiłhini tribe located on the Central California coast. As a place-based artist, Leah's kincentric approach seamlessly blends shared iconography with personal imagery, highlighting the impact each has on the other. She uses a diverse range of materials, from found to organic, traditional to modern, to explore the interconnectedness and dependence between land, kinships, and self. She understands that her art is a reflection of the way she prioritizes the protection of traditional materials and the continuation of art forms that are important to her community and intersect with her individual practice. Leah is also an adjunct professor in the Indigenous Liberal Studies Department at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She travels between New Mexico and California, maintaining close ties to her tribal community and ancestral homelands. Leah's work is included in many public and private collections, as well as internationally. Leah was honored with the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship in 2011. She was selected as a Master Artist recipient for the Alliance of California Traditional Arts, ACTA, in 2013, and most recently for a 2020 Barbara Dobkin Fellowship at the School of Advanced Research. Her education includes a BA in anthropology, an MA in cultural sustainability from Goucher College, and an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Leah is one of the contemporary artists participating in the Fire Kinship exhibition, which is opening at the Fowler Museum on January 12, 2025. Fire Kinship, Southern California Native Ecology and Art, the second PST art exhibition from the Fowler, seeks to counter attitudes of fear and illegality around fire, arguing for a return to Native practices in which fire is regarded as a vital aspect of land stewardship, community well-being, and tribal sovereignty. The exhibition will present a living history that centers the expertise of Tongva, Cahuilla, Luiseño, and Kumeyaay communities past and present. The Fowler is very grateful for a grant from the Getty to help make this exhibition possible. If you have any questions for Leah, please put them in the Q&A box. Leah, thank you for inviting us all into your studio today. I'm wondering if you might begin by sharing with us what Fire Kinship means to you.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody to my studio. I'm actually here in New Mexico. This is where I do most of my work, or I would say half the work. So for me, fire kinship, it's in the name. We think of kin as family. So I think of fire as a relative, right? It's something that we as California Indians used in terms of managing our lands. It's part of our long history of land stewardship practices. And so when I think about fire, I think of it as a collaborator in terms of making sure that I have materials to work with. And so it's, for me, an important part of a worldview that we carry as California Indians. And unfortunately, for so many tribes in California, the cultural burning practices were quelched, and there's not too many communities that still practice them to this day, at least with California's unrecognized tribal communities. And that's because many of California's tribal communities that are currently not recognized by the federal government, most of those communities don't have land base. And so it's hard for those communities to uphold cultural burning practices. And so in my community, we've recently started revitalizing the practice. And so it's great to see my community coming together to bring back these cultural burning practices, especially as someone who is a place-based artist and uses and relies on materials that come from my homelands or bioregions. That was a long answer.
That was great. So, you can take us around your studio. We can't wait to see it.
Yeah, well, so I think the the one thing that I really wanted to talk about is a lot of people in California know my work um, primarily from my dressmaking or my jewelry making, and um, I think that the fire topic really intersects nicely with um, the progression my work has taken because 2021, I think it was, there was a moratorium on abalone. And we know that, abalone is at risk due to over harvesting and climate change. And so California put a moratorium on harvesting abalone. And so it was around shortly after that, I decided that I would try to find some way to make my practice a little more sustainable. And I did a lot of work with regalia making and bark skirts. I do basketry. And I thought about, some of the scraps and the waste that I, kind of collect. And I wanted a way to utilize everything because that really is a Chumash worldview, is not wasting and to be able to use everything. So I wanted to think about how that would look if I incorporated that worldview into my practice. And so I started experimenting with my bark skirt scraps, basket scraps, um, paper making. And so that took me down a rabbit hole of making paper, sculptural paper. And so I started making paper baskets out of reclaimed basket material. Um, and so that's kind of where I've been sitting in the past, I would say 2 years now. And so my studio is in that transition. So you'll see still a lot of lapidary work because I still make jewelry occasionally, but most of the abalone I get, I save for my community so that we can have our dance dresses or the things that we need. So I don't sell to the public very often anymore, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And that's usually when I get abalone, a lot of times retired divers um, are downsizing and maybe selling their house, and they've got a couple boxes in the garage that they thought they would keep. And so a lot of times I get really nice shells that are donated to me. And so for all those people who have donated to me, thank you. It's much appreciated. And my community appreciates it as well. So I started out, and I'm just going to give you a little tour here. So bear with me. I'm in an actual old Adobe. This is the actual working studio, and I do share the space with my husband, who is a stone sculptor. Um, so over here is kind of my lapidary station. You'll see these are the tools that I use to work with shell, and then up here, these are a lot of my ochres, plant dyes. Um, I like a lot of mica in my work. In my paper, I put a lot of mica in there because I like sparkly things. But here's some of my paper making supplies. And here's kind of where my paper making station is. I use baker's rack to dry. Here's for those of you that are going to the exhibit, you can see where the poppies were made. I think I have one left. I forgot to put in the bag. So this is kind of where I work, making a lot of the paper, doing my hand dyeing. Um, and then here's another section. These are more lapidary tools. This is my paper pulp maker. And before I got this machine, I would make all my paper in buckets here. So you'll see these buckets. But I was able to get a grant and get this machine. So I'm excited to be able to produce more work than I had been before. And there's a lot of my basket materials. This is the jewelry station. Um, so it is a working studio. It's an old, like I said, adobe. So it is cold in here. We only have heat by fire, and so it makes it hard for the paper to dry. So sometimes I work seasonally, and so you'll see me producing more work in the summer or drier months. I did put an electric heater in here to help with the drying process, but yeah, it's something that um, it makes it challenging to work with paper sometimes because it is so damp in here with the Adobe. And some of the projects that I'm been working on is these large, and I don't have one now, but it's in the photograph um, on the ad for this. But this is a large paper making screen that I made myself. So this is kind of a handmade screen so I can make giant paper. And I make a lot of my tools. I make a lot of the things that I use primarily because some of my ideas there aren't tools for. And so I try to make my own tools, make my own things as a way of, I guess, um, making my work incredibly personal, even down to the tools and things that I use. So it's um it's an adventure sometimes. I don't know what I'm doing half the time when I'm making stuff. So I do a lot of experimentation. And then even with my plant dyes, I do a lot of experimentation and ochre for all of us that cook without measuring, right? It's kind of that approach where I just throw things in just based on whatever. So a lot of times I cannot repeat the same colors or the same things that I've done before because it's just at the moment and it's very um, unique to whatever I was thinking that day or whatever materials I had on hand. So there's not like a hard set science to the work that I do. Like I said, most of it is through trial and error or through um, mixing, and I never write down ratios or anything. I know there's some artists that are really good and they have these great, beautiful notebooks with dye samples and their measurements. And I never cook like that. I can't do art like that. So it's always something different each time I create something. And I don't know if there's any if anybody has any questions, or you can put them in the chat, or if there's something in my studio that you wanted me to go over a little more. Um, I
Um,
think for, oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I just have a question about the dye making. So you
Mhm.
said that it's kind of experimental and it's trial and error. Do you have starting points? Do you have materials that you work with? Do you gather the materials yourself? Are they what are your starting points and what are the materials that you work with?
So, in terms of my starting points with plants dyes, I was first introduced to that through basket weaving. And so I employ a lot of my basket weaving tech dyeing techniques to paper because I am using my basket materials. So I already know how those materials are going to react to certain dye baths or how to enhance certain colors or how to darken something and so my knowledge is based on my, like I said, with working with basketry. And then it expanded to things that I found on our property or plants that I use back home in California. So a lot of the plants that I gather, and I do gather all my materials. And so, except for indigo, I do purchase that. But this year I am growing indigo in our field. And about 4 years ago, during COVID, I grew a bunch of cotton in our field. So I saved all my cotton seeds and then I'll replant those this year. So I'll be mixing cotton into with the basket materials for a lot of my paper. Um, so I'm a very hands-on artist from beginning to end. I do like to gather and grow my materials. I do like to make my own tools. I do like to make my own dyes. Um, so it's it's kind of this seasonal way of working as well, right? So gathering at certain times, letting some materials process dry, or processing them right away. Some you have to dry and process later. So it's almost like a seasonal type of work. And then again, just because of working in an old adobe where there's a lot of moisture and we only have fire heat, it's hard to keep the paper drying consistently. So I usually start my paper making in March, as the weather starts to warm up. So, but in terms of um, plants, a lot of times I don't know the scientific names. I just know them by their common names or the names that we have in our languages. And so I just tend to, like I say, work in non-measurements of those things and work intuitively. So if there's a plant that maybe I don't know in New Mexico, I'll experiment with it, but I'll use the foundational knowledge that I have with plants that I've used in California. And that intuition is really helpful. It creates a lot of success in the dyes that I'm trying to work with. And so I think just having that knowledge of place and place-based materials and how to work with them really is applicable kind of no matter where you go. You can adopt that methodology to whatever bioregion you're in. Um, and I'm in New Mexico because my husband is from New Mexico, so he already had a studio established here, and it was quite expensive to rent studio space in California or to continue to have large studio space in California. And so this just made sense to, work here. And then I go home and gather and I work processing while I'm in California, and then I bring my materials back. So it's a long, like I said, hands-on process from start to finish. And it's seasonal.
Thank you. I have another question, which is, do you base the selection of materials for your artwork on any fire practices?
Well, I mean, in order for me to have the resources I need, fire plays a huge role in that in terms of making sure that we have basket material with nice straight shoots. It's making sure that fire also helps in the management of disease and pests, and so it protects a lot of the materials. So fire does play a big role in terms of having, I guess, quality uh, materials. Um, it's like if your materials aren't growing well or there's too much shade from invasive species, controlled burns or cultural burns can resolve a lot of those issues.
Another question we have is about your tools. Somebody would like to know if there's a tool that you've made that you're most proud of, use the most, or that you keep coming back to. I don't know if you can
Um,
also show any of these
okay, I got a
tools.
lot.
That
I
would
got
be
a lot
great.
of tools. So, a lot of people know me for my abalone circles. This is one of my secrets. So I make a lot of what's my circles, uh, And so in order to cut with abalone, we have to do it in water. So I made this drill with a basin. I can drain the water out of the basin, and this way I can cut with core drills. So I just put my core drills, insert my core drills here, and then I can cut abalone circles. So that's kind of one of my favorite ones that I use. It's not something I really made, but these baker racks come in handy for drying. So I put all my poppies or whatever I'm working on, and I dry a lot of paper on here. Um, my frames, these giant paper making screens. Um, I'm pretty proud of those. Uh, and let's see, what else is my favorite one? Oh, I don't have it with me. Um, but I do, those are probably the ones I use the most is my circle cutter, my drying racks, and my paper, large paper screens.
Thank you.
Oops, I'm trying to set you guys back up and I'm just shaking the camera around.
I'm also wondering if you might talk a little bit about the process of creation for the work that we're going to be seeing in the fire exhibit in January.
Yeah, well, I miss home sometimes. And I think one of the, at least for Chumash people, um, poppies are a significant uh, part of our communities, and it also happens to be the state flower. So it's poppies are iconic in terms of um, California and the landscape of California. And when I think about cultural burning, I think about how cultural burns also are used for seed propagation. And I am always drawn to this quote in Father Crespi's journal. So I do a lot of research, and I wanted to understand our landscape from an outsider's point of view when they first arrived. And so I read a lot of Crespi's journal. And while they were coming into our territory, into one of the bays in the Central Coast, he writes about how beautiful the fauna and flora are, and it's godlike, and how we, as the native people, how blessed we were to get to live in this land that God gave us, such beautiful land. And what he didn't realize is that the land looks that beautiful is because we have relationship with that land, and we use fire and other land management techniques to keep the land healthy and to keep our homelands um, beautiful, and to keep them in providing food and to keep disease and pests away. And so um, it it wasn't from God. It was from us. Um, we have relationship, and that reciprocity with land allows those super blooms to happen. And so um, it was right after there was a bunch of fires in California and then a bunch of rain that the poppy super blooms were um, coming back, and they were all over social media. And I kept seeing people trample or tramp all over the flowers to get their perfect Instagram picture. And so I thought about how could we how could we give people that experience, that Instagram wow experience, without um, people having to trample through flowers? Or how could we give people who may not get to experience super blooms that visual experience? And so for this particular exhibition, I created over 2,000 poppies, handmade poppies and hand dyed with plant materials. and they are suspended from the ceiling individually with cotton thread. So the whole exhibition, the whole piece is ephemeral, which is something I really been focusing on lately. Most of my work was ephemeral just because of the nature of the materials I use as a place-based artist. But now, as I've transitioned more into installation work, um, I was keenly aware of how wasteful installation work can be. And so, thinking about my own carbon footprint and uh, my tribal values in terms of not being wasteful, and I was just thinking, how can I incorporate or make my practice uh, even more in alignment with Chumash cultural values? And so I really put the intent on making my work ephemeral as much as possible, or using recycled materials, because I feel that as artists, it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we are practicing in a way that isn't harmful to our environment. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Sometimes I see other artists work and I'm in awe of it. And then I'm like, my poor brain, it starts evaluating like, oh, that's a lot of plastic, or that's a lot of nylon string, or that's a lot of latex, or that's a lot of, and so my brain starts going down this rabbit hole, and thinking about the environmental impacts of installation work. And so I just really wanted to be mindful of that in my own practice. And so that's why I started moving also into paper, because I feel like it's a really good material. I'm using plant dyes, uh, um, but it can be challenging to do ephemeral work for many reasons. But I think for myself, it fits with my value systems, and so I think it's probably will always be a huge part of my practice, is making sure that the work is um, eco-friendly, I guess is the best way to put it.
Thank you. And so with just to sort of close the loop on that, with the papers that are in the exhibition with the paper poppies, will they become different paper? Will they be composted exactly? How does that when they cease to be part of the exhibit, they are ephemeral, but what do they become?
Yes. So usually I do recycle my paper, so they'll probably become something else, unless someone else wants to, use them. But it's it's something that I've done before, and that's why I like the paper, because you can repurpose it and reuse it. I can tie them on presents. I can pulp put reconstitute them and make pulp out of them. I can make them into break it all down and make it into larger flowers. There's so many things that can be done with it. And I think for me, that's the second part of the creativity in my work, is being able to take an exhibition, be able to take an installation down and be able to repurpose it into something else. And for me, um, I enjoy that challenge. So I'm always thinking of new ways of making, or new projects, or new ways of continuing to use materials until, yeah, they just can't be used anymore. And at that time, they would be probably, most of the time, I put them in our compost pile, and then we use them in our compost in our fields, because we grow a lot of food, and I grow a lot of my own materials. And I think one thing we didn't touch on is part of the exhibition also has a soundscape with it. And I've always been curious, because we see plants as relatives. And sometimes in our stories, we there's a time where animals and people talked and conversed together. And so I thought about, well, what is it like when we talk to plants, or what would they be saying to us? Um, and so I made a soundscape using poppy data for this exhibition. And so I took different data points. Um, I used elevation, growing elevation, petal count, the amount of hours they're opened versus closed during a 24-hour cycle, um, growing season, all different kinds of poppy data. And then I put that onto a spreadsheet and I imported that into this data sonification software where it assigns tones to those data points. And once I did that, I then imported it into music software. And with the music software, I was able to assign instruments to those tones, and I was able to arrange it in a way that, because data is really linear, it was super linear when I did that. So I kind of reversed some of the bars uh, to make it a little less linear. But basically, the soundscape is really my music collaboration with poppies. And so it's for me when you're, because this installation is meant to be um, looked up while you're lying down. So there is a bench in there that you will lay down on, and then you can look up and see the poppies. So it's supposed to be a reversed view. We have a lot of um, stories that talk about um, seeing the world sometimes in a different way, or seeing things, it's kind of as above, as below type of philosophy. And so when you're looking at these poppies, there's a soundscape that is playing. And for me, I feel like it's a collaborative piece of music that the poppies and I created together, kind of like the way we use fire, right, to collaborate with poppies, right, to propagate more seeds so that we have these beautiful super blooms. And so it's, I almost feel like this installation isn't just me. I should put poppies on the text as well in terms of who created the work, because it's something that I don't do alone, right? The environment plays a huge part in my work. And if I wasn't collaborating with these plants, then I wouldn't be producing the work that I do. So I feel like um, the plants uh, are my collaborators, they're my muse, they're um, a part of my practice, and they are a part of a long history of relationship.
Thank you. We have another question going back to the abalone shells. So somebody is curious about how you work with shells, and besides drilling, what tools do you use? And if you use shells in bigger artworks or only in jewelry?
I do use shell. I actually use shell in a lot of my paperwork. I sew a lot of shell pieces onto my paper, and then I do use it for jewelry. Um, so I start with whole shells, and then I usually use some of these cutters. So this is a bandsaw. This is with a diamond blade, and these are um, used with water. So I do a lot of my cutting on these, or again, cut circles on these. And then I use a lapidary grinder. Um, these are different sanding belts that you can use depending on how thick your shell is, will determine what grit paper you use. And then I just usually start, it's like woodworking. So for those of you that work with wood, you'll understand the theory of um, starting with a really coarse grit and then working to finer grit. So I have all my, sounding belts here. And then I use these to grind the shell down. So let's see what I got here. I just have some preformed pieces. These will be for necklaces. Oh, trying to figure out the camera angle here. Um, so these have been ground, so they're not very thick. And then from there, I drill, but also I buff and polish um, all of my work, just like any other jeweler would. So, buffing compounds. And those are most of the tools I use for shell work. Um, and then again, I have a lot of shells that I use. So usually they start, in full form. So you can see some cutouts here. Um, and that's kind of it for the shells. And I would also advise people to make sure that they wear a mask. A respirator. So I wear a respirator when I work with shells. But all of these shells are the tools I use for shells are all done with water, which is an important factor in keeping some of that shell dust down.
Thank you. And then to cycle back to the soundscapes, which I think I'm probably not the only one because we have somebody that's excited by it. So we have somebody asking, saying that the soundscape dimension of the work is really exciting, and wondering if it's the first time that you're using data to compose in your work, and what other ways have you thought about data and sound in your installations?
So yeah, this was the first time I decided to do a soundscape and to try it. And honestly, it was a huge learning curve. I I'm also I also occupy space in academia. I can't decide what I want to do in life, so I go back and forth. Um, I absolutely love data and research, and so I just felt like I really wanted to understand plants better, or the plants in my bioregion better. And I thought one way for me to do that, or the way my brain works, is to look at data. And so I was looking at data and thinking about how those data points could be turned into music. And so this was my first time doing that. And I'm actually pleased with how it turned out. I just wasn't that familiar with uh, the music software application. So that was a huge learning curve. Going on YouTube, trying to figure out tutorials on how to use it. I was lucky that I did have, and I used Ableton Live. So I do have a friend that actually teaches a course at Santa Fe Junior College. So on Ableton Live, so I was able to get help from him to kind of finish it off because it was not going in the direction I wanted to, but it was just mostly because I didn't understand how to use the software yet. Um, so I enjoyed the process, and I've already started making other data sets on different plants. So I'm hoping to do more of that. For me, I always like to challenge myself in my practice. When I become good at something, sometimes it becomes boring to me. So I'm always trying to, I guess, incorporate lifelong learning in my own practice. So I'm always taking courses. I'm always looking at new ways of doing things. And so this opened up a whole new avenue for me. And I really enjoyed it. And I actually plan on taking a class so I can learn the software even better. Because I think if I would have known how to use the software, it probably would have been maybe just a little bit better. But um, all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. And like I said, I'm hoping to use more data sets that uh, that will kind of enhance the physical pieces that I'm making.
Thank you. And so the data part is new. Is the music part new to your installations as well, or have
Yeah,
you
all of
always
yeah,
used
that
music?
whole
Okay.
yeah, I kind of consider that one piece. So, in order to make the music or the soundscape, I needed to create these data sets and so that I could pull from those. And so I kind of, even though it, several different steps, I still consider it one piece. Um, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a big learning curve for me. I'm not a tech person, so it's super challenging. Um, you know, and also just being, I wouldn't say I think the last time I played an instrument was, piano as a kid or, violin as a kid. I haven't really played in decades, so music theory is something I'm trying to relearn and understand again. So it keeps me on my toes, definitely.
It sounds like the technology has been really empowering to allow you to
Hmm.
incorporate
Yeah. Oh,
something new
yeah.
into your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have another question here about kind of returning to the subject of fire and about how wildfires and the kind of increase in wildfires have impacted both your process, your practice, and your work itself.
Yeah, well, in general, I mean, when tribes were no longer allowed to do cultural burning, uh, California went through such drastic changes in such a short period of time with the impacts of colonization. And there are a lot of industries uh, that have created kind of this, for lack of a better word, firestorm in California. One large commercial agriculture in the Central Valley and the loss of Tulare Lake. Um, and then you have a lot of cattle grazing lands. And so a combination of all of those, as well as uh, damming, rivers, um, and with the suppression of cultural burning, it's kind of made California's um, climate shift. And when I think about, geez, if we were allowed to manage the land the way that we wanted to, if tribal communities throughout California were allowed to, you, we probably wouldn't be in these situations. But, we have uh, a lot of industries that impact climate in California. And in addition to not enough land being in tribal hands, right? Not enough land being under the stewardship of tribal communities. And so when people say land back, I know sometimes that's a scary sentiment to people. But you know, what we're saying is putting as much land back in native hands as possible so it could be managed correctly. And with when you have um, a lack of cultural burning, right? You have pests that come in, you have disease that come in. Sometimes these diseases that can come in will kill off trees, right? So we have like sudden oak death, for an example. And so we all know how hot oak burns, right? We all like it for our barbecue. But when you have a lot of dead, dry trees, and then you have a lot of grass growth, and maybe a lightning storm or something caused by humans, it creates a lot of fuel for these large wildfires. And on top of that, you have drought that's been happening. And so it just, again, creates this cyclical way of the way California's lands are now managed. And so I think um, without these cultural burnings happening like they used to, you are seeing, right, the result of that now, of centuries of not being able to have lands managed properly. And so until that happens, there will always be fires in California. There will always, these major wildfires, there will always be a disruption in the balance in California if the lands aren't managed in a way that they need to be.
I don't see any questions right now. Does anybody have any questions for Leah?
And I'm hoping, everybody can come to the opening. I think it's January 11th,
Yeah.
and experience this super bloom and the audio that comes with it. I think for myself, it's an installation that, like I said, from harvesting the materials, making dyes, making these handmade poppies, hand dyeing them. Um, it's a labor of love. And so I'm hoping that people will be able to experience that love, right? That love that I have for my homeland. And part of the goal is to transport viewers to my homeland um, during a super bloom. And so I'm hoping people can get out there and experience what that's like and engage with the installation.
You. We do have a last question.
Mhm.
So if somebody is very interested to know what's on the horizon for you, what are your future projects? What's next for you?
Lately, I've been making a lot of paper baskets um, and embellishing them similar to other California Indian baskets with feathers or shell. Um, but I just did a couple of a large screen that you saw. I did some large mapping projects. I'm also a nerd about maps and trade routes. So I use a lot of data uh, and research to create these large trade maps because the idea of kin and kinship is something I feel that is missing in American culture. Um, in my community, there is no rugged individualism, doing things on your own, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. That's that's not a cultural value. Um, the idea is that we live in community and that there's mutual aid and that we are related and connected. And so I'm really interested in how people were connected and what kind of materials and place-based materials were traded throughout the throughout North America. And so I'm doing a lot of mapping stuff, a lot of creating these large scale maps with trade routes or for Chumash people, we did have our ocean going vessels. So I'm using a lot of star maps, navigational maps. So I'm doing a lot of maps right now. That's where I get hyper focused on certain things. So right now I'm obsessed with maps and mapping. Um, so I'm enjoying creating these really large pieces. And I think I'll probably kind of sit there for a little while. I do have some other um, experimental things I want to work on. Um, uh, we grow a lot of corn, so I wanted to try and make um, uh, paper out of the corn husks, but they're super fibrous. So just working on like how do I break down those materials and using again some foundational practices through bark skirt making. So to soften the willow, sometimes we put them in a lye bath of ash. And so, just trying to experiment with different mediums because we have so much of it and I hate to see it go to waste. And so um, I wanted to be able to incorporate a lot of what we grow into my practice. So I think I'll be experimenting with corn husks as pulp. And it's funny because I use a lot of materials that I guess professional paper makers don't use. So when I say things like, oh, it's cottonwood or willow, it's not paper paper making artist stuff. Like I'm not adhering, I guess, to what traditionally handmade paper makers use. But that's okay. It works out and it's my own. And it's um, based on the relationship to the plants that grow in my bioregion. And so I'm okay if it's not what, you know, I guess a traditional paper making program would teach you in art school. Um, it's all right. It works. Oh, wait, you're on
Oh,
mute.
sorry. Thank you so much, Leah. It has been a real pleasure having this visit with you. Before we end, is there anything else you want to say or?
Yeah, if anybody is ever interested, if you are in New Mexico and you do want to do an actual live studio visit, you're always welcome to. As long as as long as I'm in New Mexico, our studio's open. And if anybody has any questions or wants to get started in paper making or shell work, feel free to reach out through social media. I'm always eager to share knowledge and not gatekeep. I think that when we share knowledge, it doesn't create. I know a lot of artists think that it creates competition, but I don't think so. I think it enhances each other's work and it gives me, um, I guess, more opportunities to find people that are interested in plant and data and other other things that so reach out if that's something that you feel like you want to know more about or are interested in trying to get into or practice yourself. So
All right. Well, I hope some people take you up on that. That's a very generous offer.
yeah, I like it.
Well, thank you again. And once again, the opening is on January 11th from, I think, 6 to 8 p.m. So hopefully we will see as many people as possible there. It's going to be beautiful. And Leah will be there. So
Yep.
thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone, and thank you to the Fowler for um, coming to my studio today. And again, I hope to see everyone there on January 11th.
See you there. Right. Bye.